Hey y'all, welcome back to the lab. In this video, we're going to be walking through my career in programming languages. So several months ago, I came across an X trend where people listed the order of programming languages that they learned and used. I thought it was interesting and have received several questions about the programming language that I've used in my career, most queries related to finding jobs after I published my 2025 job search and review, and so I thought it'd be interesting to share them here. And so in this post, we discuss the programming languages that I used throughout my career, as well as anecdotes and reflections on my time with those tech stacks at those companies. Alright, programming languages I've used in my career. And so here's an overview of these. On the left, we've got all of the programming languages, and then across the top, we've got all of the different companies that I've worked at professionally. And the bars are, periods of time that I used this programming language. And so we can see at MasterCard, I was using C# and TypeScript. At Instagram, Hack and Python. At Reddit, Go and Python. For HAMY Labs, F# and TypeScript. At Rippling, Python and TypeScript. And then finally at Vanta, TypeScript. And so that's the general journey of, me and my career. And throughout the rest of this post, we're going to be talking more about what using those technologies was like, my journey through my career, and any kind of recommendations and thoughts I have on these tech stacks, and a few recommendations on if I would even recommend someone to use these or not. APT and MasterCard. So I started off my career at a small data analytics company that was acquired by MasterCard. I worked on a platform team building system primitives like auth, logging, and queues before moving to a team focused on customer data LTE, which is load, transform, and extract. It was a Microsoft shop running C# on Windows servers and a microservice architecture, and used SQL Server for databases. For front end, we used a hodgepodge of technologies, including Knockout.js and raw Razor pages, but slowly moved towards TypeScript and React. So the languages there were C#, JavaScript, and TypeScript. Now, I came in with zero knowledge of C#, but eventually came around to it and remain a fan. I currently rank it as a B-tier language. SQL Server was fine for our use cases, but today I would recommend most people just use Postgres. And as for Windows machines, I still run Windows as my primary OS, as you can see here, little Windows icon down there. But I use Whistle, which is the Windows subsystem for Linux, for development, and definitely prefer Linux for my hosted workloads. I currently run most of my apps and sites on Linux boxes. I'm on Hetzner, but I'm not super tied to them. But what I am tied to is I manage these with Coolify, so that I kind of get the ergonomics of a cloud without paying for the cloud convenience costs. And one of the big questions that I get a lot from people who are curious and maybe newer in their careers is like, oh, did you have to know these languages going in? A lot of the times, as you'll see, I didn't know the language beforehand. And so there's often ramp up time at the beginning of a job to figure out the language, to learn the tech stack and stuff like that. And it's less important of the knowledge you have going in, but more how quickly can you ramp up and actually be productive in that language. Instagram and Meta. So I left to seek out higher scale problems. I felt I had a decent grasp of system architectures, but was curious how that actually worked at scale, and especially really large scale, like planet scale. And I found myself at Meta joining Instagram's media delivery team, which focused on optimizing the delivery of images and videos, and eventually on the media logging team, which focused on the accuracy, reliability, and scalability of our logging and metrics pipelines. A large portion of the Meta codebase ran Hacklang, which is a fork of PHP, across a huge amount of monoliths. I don't even know what the numbers are, but I think it's the high thousands, maybe even more. Instagram still had a decent chunk of its codebase in Python and Django monoliths by the time I left, though I know that there was a big push to move more things into Hacklang because, believe it or not, Hacklang is actually pretty fast, especially compared to Python Django. And as I'll talk about in a minute, these Python and Djangos are not the same Python and Djangos you would see in the rest of the world. Both of these were actually forked years before, and so while had a lot of the same or similar things as the outside version, were entirely different things inside that were built up over years of trying to make this stuff faster and work at, the scale of Meta. Now, as for databases, we used MySQL, though there were so many abstractions built on top of it that it might as well have been a different database. Meta is big on graph databases, and they have all these different ways to do migrations and stuff. And so nothing you really used there, unless you were on the graph team or the MySQL team, actually looked like MySQL, even though that's the actual technology that was there under the hood. And I didn't do much, really any, front end there, but a lot of that was in JavaScript and React, and I believe they didn't use TypeScript, but instead used Flow, and I think that's still the case today, but I'm not there anymore, so can't confirm. So the languages we used there were Hackling and Python. And now I knew Python coming in from side projects and classes in college, but I definitely wasn't that good at it. I certainly didn't know Hackling, as it's a very rare language. I think there's like less than 5 companies using it in the world, though perhaps there's more. And so again, like, I get all these questions about, like, do you need to know the technology before you go in? And really, oftentimes you don't, because they can't really find anyone who does know these things, especially for something like Hackling. Like, where would you even pick that up? But what is important is being able to understand it quickly and be able to ramp up quickly so you can start being productive. Now, Python is not my favorite language. I understand why people like it, but I think it has a lot of foot guns that should have been solved for. I rank it in the B tier and consider it a necessary evil, as I've had several gigs in it and likely will have future gigs in it as well. Now, as for Hackling, I really don't think anyone should use it. I think the language is actually pretty good, but practically I don't see a market for it. If you're reaching for Hackling, just use PHP instead. It's more widely used and supported and has improved a lot over the years. And for those reasons, I put Hackling in the D tier. Now, if you want to learn more about Instagram's tech stack, you can check out Instagram's Tech Stack Will Surprise You, where I deep dive into a lot of the surprising things about working at Instagram and Meta, Reddit. So after 3.5 years at Instagram, I was ready to try something else. I'd solved problems at the highest scales I could reasonably achieve, planet scale, but was using tools so bespoke that I was worried those skills wouldn't transfer to any other position. And as an example, back in 2019, I calculated my code was run around 1 trillion times per day, which is a totally useless vanity metric, but one that I was endlessly excited over. Now, I'll note that this is a common meme in the industry where you get an 8-year veteran of FANG and they can't even spin up a simple web server. Not because they're bad engineers per se, but because the tools are so different from anything in the real world that there's significant learning curve to get readapted. And one of the most common and simplest examples of this is how we do version control. The real world, basically everyone's on Git, right? You're just using Git everywhere. But at Meta, they've rolled their own version on Mercurial, and they have this really cool tool called SmartLog, which lets you move things around and do stacked diffs. And I'm not maybe missing all of the tools that they had for that stuff, but I am missing how good the tooling was for stacked diffs. And coming into the real world, it was really hard to figure out how to do that because doing it from the command line on Git is super clunky. And there's now more tools out there. I currently use Graphite and my VS Code editor as the closest thing I've ever found to the great tooling for version control for stacked diffs. But even then, it's hasn't been updated in over 1.5 years. Everything else is command line tools. And I just think it's so interesting that there's a whole world in each of these, FANG companies of great developer tools, and most of it, even 5-10 years later, hasn't seeped out into the real world and become widely available. And so I felt that maybe a startup was right for me. I could test that my ability to produce impact in a new environment, switch things up to keep it interesting, and use tools everyone has access to. And this led me to Reddit. Now, I love Reddit, and I am an avid user, but I quickly found out that Reddit was not a startup, but a scale-up. Reddit was in the process of a Python 2.7 monolith to Go microservice migration because the cost and benefits of trying to upgrade to Python 3 didn't make sense to them. Now, this means that Reddit was trying to do a few things all at once. Learn a new language, which is Go. They didn't really have any experts there. Everyone that had was existing there over the years and understood the code base were Python experts. They were trying to break apart a 10-year-old monolith into microservices. And at the same time, they were trying to hyperscale headcount to support IPO, which is a lot to try to do, especially at once. And really any of these, would have been hard to do by themselves. But yeah, again, trying to do it all at once. Now, I wasn't at Reddit long, but while there, I used Go to write new features and Python when I needed to work in the monolith to help separate things out. And this monolith was a huge pain. I recall spinning up a dev environment took 45 minutes after each change to test things, which is, a big reason why I left so soon. Imagine this, how many changes you have to do to something to actually get it to pass its tests and get it to run end to end, and you have to wait 45 minutes after each of those to even see if it worked. It was really, really hard for me to get anything done at that time. Now for databases, Reddit was on Cassandra and Redis and moving towards Postgres for its microservices. And back to DevX, like DevX is one of those things that like I hadn't really considered as important for my satisfaction at work. Because it wasn't one of those things that I ever really considered was movable or changeable. Like, I just kind of felt like whatever the DevX at a company was, that's just how it is, and you can't improve it. But after seeing several different companies and kind of what the developer experience is there, I can now say that I think DevX makes a huge difference in developer satisfaction and like how quickly you can get things done. And so if you are in an environment where it's taking like 45 minutes to test something, one, like that's not normal, and two, there probably are ways to cut that down significantly, and it might be worth investing in that. And so for programming languages, at Reddit was using Go and Python. And so we see Python again, but Go is the new one here. And I came in with an understanding of Go, but little practical experience actually building systems in it. Now, I like the idea of Go, but implementation-wise, I think Go is lacking, which is why I rank it as a C tier. I think Go has good bones, but the creators ignored decades of programming language design, which left it as a really good version of an old programming language. I get why people use it, it's simple and fast, but I think other languages do that well, along with having good ergonomics, and we shouldn't have to choose. As for the other technologies, I can't say much because I didn't get enough time or experience working with them. HAMY Labs. So after Reddit, I was a little bit dejected. I had such high hopes for my time there, but left feeling a bit lost and without answers to my questions of how impactful I could be in a new environment, or if I could be good with tools available to the wider world. If anything, I felt less confident with my ability to do so. But I'd always wanted to try starting my own businesses, and I felt this was a great opportunity to do so I tried it. And build I did, using technologies I liked. F#, TypeScript, SvelteKit, and Postgres were my go-tos during this time. I had a really good time building during this time, but I eventually discovered that I was just doing that, building, and not actually creating anything of value. Yes, I enjoyed the creation of it, but it wasn't really doing anything useful and certainly wasn't paying the bills. So here are the programming languages were F# and TypeScript. F# and TypeScript are both A tier for me. I think they have great type systems, and while they both have their own quirks, are really shining examples of what good language design can do. If I had to recommend one to someone, I would probably choose TypeScript, as I think it's easier to onboard to, has a much larger ecosystem and thus docs, and you can actually get a job. And I think this is a key one, especially to people who are asking for like a new programming language to try. Most of you are like newer in your career, and I really think it's important to first get yourself settled and like get money coming in, because then you can experiment all you want. But if you're over here like experimenting in Haskell or whatever, and you still haven't gotten a job, like Haskell probably won't be the thing that helps you get that first job. Now, for seasoned programmers who have a few languages under their belts, and ideally like experience through several jobs so that, you know, they have money coming in, they can support themselves, and, you know, going and experimenting with a programming language isn't going to get in the way. I think F# is a fantastic entry point to functional programming that also lends itself to building real software. You may not choose it as your go-to language like me, but you will have fun and learn a few things along the way. And for more on F#, I write a ton of blogs about F#, but here's a few that you might want to check out. Why F# is a fun programming language, how I got interested in F#, and 7 reasons F# sucks, all linked from the blog post. Rippling. Now, after deciding that full-time entrepreneurship probably wasn't for me, I went searching for a job and found myself at Rippling, a hyper-growth HR scale-up. In some ways, this was the exact opposite of what I'd set out searching for after Instagram. It was a large company doing not the most exciting things, you know, unless you get excited about HR. But it did have a bit of startup-iness inside of it, so I gave it a whirl. I worked on the risk engineering team, which built systems to detect and prevent fraud and really try to keep people from stealing our money. I owned the systems protecting our flagship payroll products. Now, the tech stack was a dual monolith with TypeScript, Node, and React on the front end, and Python and Django on the back end. And for databases, we used Mongo, and yes, most data models were relational. And so the programming languages were TypeScript and Python. Now, there's really nothing new to add here, except that Python rears its head once again, which is why I believe I haven't seen the last of it. And as for databases, just use Postgres. I get that Mongo is quote-unquote better for scale, but almost all data is relational, so if you don't use a database that handles relations well, you're gonna have an interesting time trying to make it do so anyway. And if you think you're not gonna do this, you probably are. Now, I will admit that Mongo has gotten better, and it's certainly workable even when we choose to do in-memory joins all over the place. And I think we forget sometimes that like software is pretty fast, and so like even these quote-unquote inefficient things, if you're doing them in a way that's asynchronous and so it's not blocking a user, actually works relatively well, at least to like some substantial scale. And I do think that Mongo has like really incredible use cases where you're doing just like KV lookups. But I just think in most cases, like your primary database, the thing that's handling your primary lookups and stuff is going to need to be relational because all data is relational anyway. And so I would definitely do a double take before picking something like Mongo or any kind of like NoSQL or KV thing for your primary DB, and instead use them where they're better suited, which is usually a secondary layer of caching. Vanta. Now, after coding Python for a while, I was curious what else was out there. I joined Rippling during one of the hardest job markets of my career and wanted to see if more opportunities had opened up. The job market was still frosty, but not at a full-on blizzard as it had been post-2022 or the ZERP era. Now, after 88 hours of interviewing, I landed my new gig at Vanta, a security and compliance company. We're using TypeScript, an A-tier language, for both front-end and back-end in a monolith. And we are using Mongo for our database, but to their credit, there aren't as many in-memory joins as I'd feared. And the programming languages are TypeScript. Next. So what's next for me? I don't know, but I am having a pretty good time coding in just TypeScript so far, so that's a good sign. Now, if you like this post and want to hear more rants about software engineering or programming, give me a follow or subscribe to me on YouTube. And if you like this post, you might also like one of these, my 2025 programming language tier list, where I rank a bunch of different languages, all the languages that I've used here in my career, and also give you reasons for why I rank them as such. My 2025 job search as a senior software engineer, including graphs and charts and stats of like how everything went and how I studied for it and stuff like that. And finally, why F# is a fun programming language. A good entry point if you've ever been curious about like why I like F# so much. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.